Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Line Your Own Pockets. Got another user question today, and one that was really detailed. I think we spent, 2 weeks just thinking about kind of how we're going to, different ways to split this up and how we're going to tackle it. And it's a question that was near and dear to my heart when it comes to multiple strategies. But why don't you get a little bit more into the details of it, and we'll get started tackling it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. This comes from Emmett H, who emailed me this question as a suggestion for the podcast. So he says, "What is the best way to approach the transition from a single strategy to a portfolio of strategies? Do you
Mhm.
try to develop variations of that strategy because you know it fundamentally works? Do you create a complementary strategy? Do you create a short strategy to work opposite your long strategy?" Etc. So he goes on a little bit more, but I want to stop there because I knew this was a good question. I immediately added it to our topic list.
Yeah.
But the more I go back and look at it, the more there is here. And it brought back so many memories of when I first started trading and like a very important fundamental phase that I got through that I really didn't even realize was a problem when I was in the middle of it.
Well, and I think when you read that short strategy for your long one, like that's a podcast in and of itself. So we'll try to get through some of these, but I think it's always first important to realize that a lot of people, this is a really good problem to have right off the bat, because if you're thinking of creating a second strategy, hopefully, and by definition, it means you have one good strategy to begin with, right? You shouldn't be trying to create a second strategy if your first strategy sucks or if it's just not, a great thing to trade or something like that. So, first of all, you want to start an answer like that with congratulations. I mean, hopefully you're not, if you're starting to think about this and you don't have strategy one, down packed and making some money and you're happy the way it's performing, then I'd say don't even bother thinking about this right now. You're not there yet. But if you are, you should just take a second and go, oh, good, and understand that you have probably some sort of process that allowed you to arrive at this strategy that you should also be happy with. And then, right, take a breath and say, okay, what's next? But right, just wanted to put that caveat out there that some people I notice they talk a lot about multiple strategies and there might not even have one yet. So if
Yeah.
you're there, you're just not there yet, and you gotta go and figure that out, and then we can start talking about different multiple strategies after that.
Yeah. So as you've probably heard me say a bunch of times, the only thing harder than going from zero to one strategy is going from one to two.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I mean by that. And I like the way you phrase that about somebody getting started here and making this decision. So, and I'm assuming that this person is somebody that does have a strategy that works. So they're not thinking, oh, okay, well, my one strategy doesn't work, but if I get a whole bunch together, then the
Mm-hmm.
aggregate's going to work, right? So, which I think is a little bit different. But all right, so imagine, people that get into trading, there's so much BS out there. There's so much snake oil. Just to get into trading at all, you should have a skeptical mindset. So somehow you've been able to see through that and think, okay, I think I can do this, right? And you've gone through some trials and tribulations. You've learned a lot of the lessons that you should have learned before you tried and
Mm-hmm.
you had to learn for yourself, right? You've pulled your stops and of course that didn't work out. So you've gone through a lot of things to get that first strategy working. Now, when you get to that point, you're in a rare, small group of people that has been able to do that. There's probably nobody in your hometown that you live in that is doing the same thing. So you feel kind of lonely.
Yep.
Um, so, but also you feel like, man, I've sort of I figured this out. You're really proud of something that you created here. It's just making you money, right? It's like a money machine you've created for yourself. So you feel like you've got this secret. You feel like on some level, maybe you're the only person that's doing it this way and you kind of figured it out. And which is great. And that's the mindset that is very natural to have. But the problem is when you get into that mindset, you don't even realize it, but you kind of get calcified in the way you think about how trading works. I
Yeah.
see this time and time again, especially with small cap, low float shorting traders that they've got this really good strategy that works. They're kind of printing money with it. They think that's how trading works. So, and
Yes.
they don't even realize it, but they're in this rut where they're not even going to recognize other opportunities, other strategies that can work and be very profitable, but in a different way. Like they're going to have to change the way they think about what they think trading is.
Well, and it's the old saying, right? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? You have carved out this is, and then some people it's even they've made it like an identity. Like I short small cap junkie stocks. That's what I do, and that's great. And there'll be periods of time that works well, and they'll hopefully you're making a ton of money doing it. There are probably size constraints and liquidity constraints and borrow like there's limits that you hit when you do something like that, and then there's the one option to try to figure out a way past those limits, and another option like we talk about to find different strategies out there that you can allocate hopefully a growing pool of capital to. And yeah, I was thinking of those people exactly when you were saying that, is that yeah, there's people who get pigeonholed and they say this is what I do, as opposed to looking at it as a okay, I've got like a base strategy that is working for me, and it's helping pay bills and things like that, and that is giving me the freedom, the time to go do this next one, two, or three things that I can do. And yeah, that's going to be the hardest part, is because you're kind of trying to step back outside of a box after spending so much time building a box around yourself that has, it's very comfortable and it does well, and then having to go outside of that and say, well, what about different ways of doing it? But in the long run, it's going to be the easiest ways to get around any sort of constraints that you're seeing inside of your trading, is just to go look at what someone else completely unrelated. And we talked a little bit about, in a prior podcast, talking about the correlation between strategies. Well, the best way to deal with that without having to know the math behind it is just look to see if a strategy is just completely unrelated. If your strategy A is shorting low float penny stocks, and strategy B is, buying the dip on S&P 500 names, well, you're going to know that you are so diametrically opposed that there's not going to be, you're not just upping your correlation there without even needing to know the math. You just kind of intuitively know that that's the case.
Yeah, I think for systematic traders, it's especially hard coming from the small cap, low float space, because the back tests in that space, they look really good.
Mm-hmm.
They're it's a solid strategy, and there are lots of different variations. Um, but when you go to back to something kind of in a different universe, it's not going to look as good at that as the small cap, some of the small cap back tests. So you're going to immediately dismiss it prematurely. And I see it time and time again where people that are in that rut, and they don't realize they're in that rut. And the danger is, maybe they've had some drawdowns, but they've come out of them. This is exact situation that happened to me. So although I wasn't trading small caps at the time, I had my own strategy that was working really well. And I remember I had a drawdown one year that was pretty gnarly, but I came out of it, right? And ended up making plenty of money that year. The next year I had a bigger drawdown, and I had thought, like when I went and analyzed the drawdown from the year before, I took away exactly the wrong lesson, which was if I'd have just kept my size uh, without sizing back during that drawdown, I would have made a lot more money than I did that year.
Mm.
So when I was in this drawdown the following year, or maybe a couple years later, same basic strategy. It was a much worse drawdown, and I really resisted the urge to size down, and I had just made this huge hole for myself. And when you do that, and that's the strategy you trade. Like you don't have any other strategies that like what you described about being your identity. That was totally me.
Yeah.
I had put my girls through college with this strategy, and here it wasn't working. Like, and I didn't have anything else. I mean, what a dead end it felt like. I felt like, I mean, I didn't know what to do. So the fact that, and I was just forced. And what I realized, the lesson from that first drawdown, the one I should have taken from that is not, okay, well, it was a drawdown. Wow, that was bad. But at least I made money that year. I really should have taken that and really figured out other strategies to add to my arsenal that would be better than the one I was trading. And that should have been the goal. But because I came out of the drawdowns sort of unscathed and I felt like I could see a path forward, I didn't learn the right lesson that I should have learned at that point.
And that, that I think is the why, right? And that's what you got to ask yourself. I think step one, when you're creating a new strategy, is why are you creating a new strategy, right? It shouldn't just be because we told you it's important. But, like you kind of mentioned where you said when you go from the shorting low float stocks, everything else, the back test isn't going to look as good. But that's if you're doing the back test by itself, right? So what you're looking for when you're building new strategy is that the combined back test looks even better. So, the drawdowns of one aren't very correlated with the drawdowns of the other. And that, like you just mentioned, that was your why to create new strategies, because hopefully you have something that when your main strategy is in a drawdown, it's helping, pick up some of the slack. It's helping to reduce and diversify that drawdown just a little bit. And that, I think, has got to be step one when you're looking to build a new strategy, is you just take a step back and you say, okay, well, what is this strategy looking to accomplish? Am I just hedging for when this strategy I'm running doesn't work anymore, the edge is gone in the market or something? Or is there a hole in my buying power where I'm not utilizing capital for a certain time, like Dave overnight? Should I shore up something there? So like with most things, step one should start with the goal. Is what is the goal? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish with this second strategy? And then from there, that might actually answer some of these questions for you when you get that answer of why. Now, you listen to us. I think we're all in agreement here that more strategies is just, if they're at all uncorrelated and if they have at all edge, more strategies are always just going to be better. But instead of just hearing that, when it comes to strategy two, I think it's really, okay, what role am I trying to fill here? What hole am I looking to plug in my trading that I think this strategy is gonna help me with?
Well, let me play devil's advocate here a bit and ask you a question
Okay.
that I would assume that a lot of people are thinking. And so the way you put it was, like, what are you trying to accomplish with the second strategy?
Mm.
Michael, we're trying to make money here. I want to make money with the second strategy. I want to make a bunch of money
Yeah.
with the second strategy. Why? I mean, what are you talking about? What am I trying to accomplish? Of course, that's the goal.
Well, the goal is more, where is that first strategy lacking? So, for example, say I've got a strategy that scalps the open 30 minutes, which is amazing. It makes a whole bunch of money. That my goal may be, okay, well, I should look for something that trades in the afternoon or on the close, because if I'm just scalping the open, I probably have a bunch of capital sitting there not doing anything. That is going to be a different problem from I have a strategy that does really well to the short side, But when, markets are ripping and animal spirits are on fire, which is, what's kind of happening right now in the market, I'm just getting completely killed. So if is it a different time? Is it a different time frame? Is it a different side, long or short? Is there, I noticed that my strategy only works 3 days a week and I'm looking to find something that works the other two, or whatever it is. It's just kind of like saying, okay, well, I'm going to go to the gym because I want to get stronger. It's like, yeah, but you need to know a little bit more about yourself than that. Like, where are you right now? Is it a certain body part or a goal that you're training towards? And just taking a couple seconds to write that down and to formalize, right? My opening trading is fine, but I've got nothing for the afternoon. Well, that just ticked a bunch of those questions we read at the beginning of the show off the list. What is it that you're looking for? Doesn't necessarily matter if it's long or short at that point. It just matters that it triggers through this time frame and not necessarily this time frame when you're sitting on a bunch of completely unused capital.
Yeah. So one of the things I just thought about as you were talking, do we really, how important is it that strategies are really uncorrelated? What if you just come up with a strategy that is correlated and still prints money? Do you care?
Yeah, because you would just take the better of the two, right? It's like saying if I had the best asset, if I had four assets that are 100% correlated, I'm not going to spread my money across the four of them. I'm going to pick one. I'm going to put it in because why bother doing multiple things because it's correlated. So if I have two completely correlated,
so what if it's 90% correlated or 80% correlated or
well, then it's not
70%?
Correlated, right? Like,
So it's got to be either 100% or nothing.
No, I would say if it's near 100%, then it wouldn't make sense to do either of them at all. If it's like 90% correlated, you still just probably pick the better one. But when you start to get into the 70% or below, which is like loosely correlated, or a near zero, which is not correlated at all, well, now you've got some sort of real strategy diversification benefits, right? The only, and the reason for it is because you just have a finite amount of buying power. So if the strategy is 100% correlated, that means it's probably triggering roughly the same assets at the same time, for the same hold period, that type of thing. That's what you would need to be. Because, like, basically, I could see a world where you could take the exact same strategy and it could be uncorrelated with itself. So, like, say one of them is you're buying an opening range break and you're selling 5 minutes later. The other one's you're buying the same opening range break and you're closing it at the end of the day. It is the same strategy, but it's certainly not going to have the same correlation of returns because it holds for longer. So, when I mean lack of correlation, I mean just that. It's not tying up your same amount pool of buying power at the same time for roughly the same results, because why bother? Just trade the best one at that point.
Okay. I'm going to take a little different approach, I think. So the way I think about it, I don't really think about it quite that way, and I think
Good. I didn't think we were going to fight this one. I like this. Bring it on. I've got a Monster Energy drink on my desk, and all afternoon if we want to go.
Yeah, I hate for it to come back to the day trade versus swing trade thing again, which you brought up earlier. I noticed. So
yeah, any little jab I can do, I'm gonna.
Oh, I know. So the way I think about this is maybe it's a little bit different. And the way I suggest other traders think about it. So here's one question that people ask me. New traders that are just getting into this. Dave, is this strategy, they'll show me a backtest they did. Is this good enough? Is this good enough to go live with? And if I came across that strategy, me, myself, right now, knowing what I know, knowing the strategy I trade now, the answer might be, well, no, I probably wouldn't trade that one. But for this person, and for the person I was 10 years ago, I think they should go with it. There's a lot they're going to be able to learn by putting that strategy, even though it's not perfect, into play. And because I think And now let's say that person already has a strategy and they come with a second one, then they're saying, Dave, what about this one? I think you want to compare and be calibrated within yourself. Like it's almost a little pointless asking me
Yep.
if this is a good enough strategy. So I usually shift that right back to them and say, okay, how does this compare to the other strategies you have? How does it compare to other back tests you've done, like the best back test, like the most, the one that you feel the best about? That's what should be comparing yourself against. And that puts you in this feedback loop of, okay, here's the best one I've got so far. Let me see if I can beat that somehow in my process. How can I make my process better? Come up with a strategy to beat that one. So I think I don't, correlation doesn't really come into that yet. So I think maybe it's probably a little bit of swing trading mindset where that is going to be more important.
No, no, it's a difference in I don't disagree with anything you said. I got to put my monster back down. I was getting ready for a fight here, but no, it's correlation of returns only matter when they're competing for the same resources, right? That's the only time that you really care, right? So if you have and it's kind of like how at the end of the day you have to do some sort of ranking in your strategy. If there's, 5 symbols that came through at say roughly the right time at the same time, I know that would never actually happen in practice, but you would have to look at them and say, based off some metric, I've got to decide which ones to take, right? If, you had a strategy in the exact same moment, 5 symbols came through at the end of the day, you're going to have to decide which orders go out, right? And it's the same thing is that if you have 2 strategies and they're not competing with each other and they both have edge, then trade them both. But the problem is, and the time that you have to look at the correlation between them is when, say you have $100,000 worth of buying power and strategy A is eating up all of it. And then strategy B is trying to trigger off, but you're out of buying power. Well, you have to ask yourself one of 2 questions. Does it make sense to take strategy A smaller to allow some trades from strategy B or not? And if they are perfectly correlated or very well correlated, then who cares? Just take whatever trades come through first. If they are uncorrelated in nature, then you can say, okay, let's lighten up on A to allow B to trade more because I know over time that's going to smooth returns, right? And this is the reason I probably think of this more is because on the open as a swing trader, I have these are the stocks that I'm going to buy, and I have to do some sort of allocation of them. So, if I've got 10 trades to make and I only have the buying power for 5 trades, I've got to decide of which ones am I going to allow through. So I do a lot of time looking at my strategies and making sure that I'm doing some trend following and some mean reversion and some kind of exploitative type systems and things like that because that limited buying power. But that's the only time you need to look at it. If you still have buying power to place trades, then yeah, just anything that you find that has edge, trade it. When that buying power becomes the limiting factor, that's when you have to take a step back and look and say, okay, how do I divvy this up? And that just might be a future problem for this user. Maybe that's not after strategy 2. The only time it would be for strategy 2, again, is if like they're all triggering, like, you're doing a 5-minute opening range break. Well, there could be times or many times where you're trying to take way more trades than you have buying power for. And then you have to figure out, okay, how much do I allow for this strategy versus that one?
Yeah, I think I suspect that most traders that are listening to this aren't at the point where they're using all their buying power. And like that, I think that's it has to be more common in the swing trading space just because you have less of it with the same amount of money. You have less buying power by definition. So you're going to be running out of it quicker. And you're always pretty much, or a lot of strategies are going to be entering on the open, exiting on the open, so they're not entering throughout the day normally. So I think most day traders, I'm imagining, I believe, are on a path to trying to muster up the courage, have the strategy, prove it to themselves to scale up to the point where they can run out of buying power, and they do run into the issues that you're talking about of correlation, like where correlation will even matter that much. So I think it's probably a more advanced trader that is thinking about correlation in exactly the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so some of that for swing trading, I'll push back on. Like 90% of what I do is limit orders, right? Stop limits, things like that are set earlier in the day. So they're not a lot of market on open and market on close stuff. Some of it, but not a lot. So most of them, they're just limits that exist out there. We obviously can use margin, right? I do sometimes. We don't do as much, but still get 4-to-1 margin on my swing trades overnight. Again, that's going to be size of your account and all that kind of stuff, right? Different privileges for different people in the trading world. But so all of that is certainly some of it's true, right? Some of it isn't. But again, I think the main thing is just looking at what resources are you competing for, and if you are not utilizing your buying power, I think you kind of have to ask why, right? Do you not like your strategy enough? Are you taking too much risk per individual trade? Because that in and of itself could be an excuse for another strategy. Say you have a strategy that has a great return, a great CAGR, right? You're making 30% a year or whatever, but you're looking at the max drawdown and it periodically goes into 20-30% drawdowns on your portfolio. If you were to apply all your capital to it, and you just say, well, that's not enough. That's another reason to look at a strategy that hopefully when it experiences a drawdown is different than when the other one experiences a drawdown, or all you're doing is you're kind of amplifying those drawdowns. So, again, it's all about step one, are you utilizing your entire buying power? If not, then if the strategy has edge, just keep trading it. If it's going to be perfectly correlated, you've basically just sized up strategy A. But if it makes you feel better, you're doing a different strategy. If you are utilizing all your buying power, which could just be at specific points of the day, like I'm harping on the open because I think probably most people take most of their trades around the open. If you find that you're hitting that buying power restriction right away, then yeah, you need to find some way to split or to rank or to do something. If it's to the point where you have a completely unused hole of buying power, like you find that near the middle of the day or the end of the day, maybe some of your losers have stopped out and you're only holding the ones that are winning or something like that, well then you could specifically just utilize a strategy for that time frame, something that looks for news events or breakouts or something during the middle of the day, knowing that you're just going to always have buying power to do it, and it's going to be uncorrelated enough without you having to sit there and actually run the back test together and crunch that math.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm kind of harping on this is the best path for somebody who has a strategy that is working for them to get to strategy two is often, and assuming strategy two is in a different universe, right? Is often to figure out how they can improve strategy one in some way or take an alteration of strategy one, like create a strategy that's very adjacent and probably very correlated to strategy one, and like figuring out how to get more trades into strategy one, figuring out another entry tactic for strategy one besides getting on the open like something else. I'm figuring out how to trade them in the opposite way. And the reason it's important is because they're already very, very familiar with that universe that strategy one trades. So there's often, when you start looking at a completely different universe, I don't care how good a trader you are, there's going to be a learning curve there. It's just understanding the universe, and that's going to take some time for you to get to the point where you can really create a strategy that works well with that universe. So often the more fertile way to improve is to kind of stay in strategy one's space where you're looking at strategies that are pretty correlated with it. So I think
That's
that's,
going
what do you
So
think?
I guess whether I agree or not is, I guess, whether how long the trader is on the journey. Because I think if it's just your second strategy, I think that's great. If you're still going to the well for your 10th strategy and you're still looking to short low float penny stocks over and over and over again, then you haven't done what we talked about at the beginning of the show, which was step outside of that box and look for different things to work on. So if I'm just constantly tweaking in the same universe, in the same direction, looking for overextended penny stocks to short, and if I'm just doing that for 5, 6 strategies, it's like at some point, why not just grab like a maybe 2 really wicked ones and just use those and keep the other ones maybe in the background for if those strategies fail. But so the way I look at it is that you should spend some time doing that. But as soon as you have, the Pareto principle, as soon as you've kind of felt like you've milked most of the edge out of that, like 80% of the edge, and you're going to spend your next 6 months banging your head to get a little bit more edge out of the shorting low flow penny stocks, are you missing a incredibly easy base hit somewhere else of trading gaps or something like that you haven't stepped outside of that wheelhouse on? So I think there's, for the second strategy, maybe, but I think there's just that point where you are just trying to squeeze, everything over and over again. And you get to this diminishing marginal return where it's like, hey, you would have been way better if you spent a week and just bought like a swing trading mean reversion system that would just totally complement. And you could have done that in a week and it would have been good to go because it wouldn't compete in that same kind of buying power arena and everything as before.
Well, I'm going to disagree because I think there's so much depth in a lot of these strategies and a lot of these universes that the best traders get so much juice out of the lime that they're trying to squeeze. I was talking to a trader yesterday, this guy I've been working with for a long time. He makes between 500 and 1,000% a year off this strategy. And he's got multiple variations. So, and now, I know a lot of people aren't going to believe that, but it's true. And when we started working together, he wasn't doing that well, but he was like, he is still very much in this one universe, and he's just got multiple variations, and it's working very well for him. And so I think I think in general, there's more depth in a lot of these areas than people realize. Like I know that we talked about a podcast with John Arnold. And I remember the quote he said, he's not looking to go an inch deep and a mile wide. He's looking to go an inch wide and a mile deep. He's like one of the best natural gas traders ever. And I think there is more depth than a lot of people and a lot of traders realize in a lot of these universes.
I would agree, right, for the average person, but I hope you'd actually agree that eventually, the question is when. Eventually, you've tapped all of the potential, or at least, most of it, in a way that there's that diminishing marginal utility. And that's what I want to make sure people. So we just keep, and we're just using examples. That's why we keep saying the low flow pennies thing. But there's something going on right now. I've been reading a lot on Twitter where locates have kind of gone through the roof. And there's some people who have seen their edge completely destroyed, not because their strategy is bad, just because there's this fundamental change in the market right now in which this style has potentially gotten so popular that the edge has just ripped out. So I kind of think of that person and say, well, if they have spent their entire life learning to short these things and becoming so amazingly great at it, and something happens that just completely sweeps that away, the argument to be made, if you're really, really good at this, the locate fee probably doesn't matter anyway. But for those people, if they had just employed a little bit of time in a kind of other strategy out there, then it might not be as panicky as they are now to help fix it. Like, so say they had something to the long side and that was making some amount of money, so they were still green each month. They were still, putting money in their pocket. They're still feeding their kids. I read one thing from a guy who's, pretty prominent. I won't mention names, but has a decently sized Substack and stuff. And he's like, I'm going to get a job because his strategy was just deployed that much. Well, imagine if that same person had a couple of these other strategies that were utilizing maybe even in the same low float penny stock space, but to the long side, and those were actually performing somewhat well at the moment. Yeah, he's taking a huge pay cut to his life, but it might be enough for him to skate by long enough to figure out a way around this and to move on. So that's my worry more than anything about people going too deep on something. Like your natural gas trader. What if, and this happened for oil, if natural gas just doesn't move for 2 years? Just doesn't do shit like oil until the whole Iran war. I know a guy who was an oil trader, and in the oil sands that we have up in Alberta, he was an energy trader, and he was just having a rough couple of years because oil just literally did not move for like a 2 year period. So yeah, I just worry again. It might be unfounded fears for me. I just worry if I get too niche into one area and something comes along to pop that along. It's all well and good if you've had so much success that you can, coast on interest on your money for a while or something like that. But it just comes from an absolute coming back from zero as opposed to having this completely uncorrelated style of trading that's just different from everything. You go, okay, I can live off that for a little bit while I figure out how to fix, the thing that got broken by some external event.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because to get really good at this, you do have to go deep, but then at some point you do need to start going essentially wide or coming up with new ideas. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, and I think what our disagreement highlights more than anything is that it's personal, right? There's someone out there who wants to go so deep because they want to make 1,000% a year, and they're okay going all in on one strategy to hopefully hit it big and make a shit ton of money and buy a yacht and retire, right? And it might just be stages of your life. And then there's someone like when I'm testing accounts now or I'm testing strategies now, I'm thinking more about drawdown than ever because my accounts have just gotten to a certain point where it's like I'm looking at it, okay, the amount of risk I need to take, the amount of return I need to potentially make has altered from someone else. Like we started, we talked about growing a small account. If you got 10 grand to your name and you're like just out of college and you're a young professional, just have at it, right? You should be able to be fine with a 30% drawdown in your account. It's 3 grand, right? Go nuts. If you have a $10 million account and you are 50 and you have 3 kids, you're not going to want to do a 30, right? You're not going to want to draw down $4 or $5 million on your account because you're probably not going to live to see 60 at that point with the stress on everything. So, it could just be this could just be personal to someone who is more or less risk averse and depending on what their goals are. Is it to make as much money as possible or is it to have as smooth of an equity curve as possible? Those are two completely separate
Yeah,
things to optimize for, right?
no question about it. It's important to figure out what you're optimizing on, and yeah, those are two very different situations and different things. So yeah, I think it's super interesting to think about that, and uh, I love talking with and working with really good traders. I mean, that's why I started this whole thing is to attract and work with the best traders that are, and probably actually not the best traders, but the ones that will be the best soon. And to help them make that transition, that is, I, I just, I really enjoy helping somebody at that level because it's really, there's so much improvement that they can do. And there's like nobody in the world that can really talk the language that they're like knows where they've been and what they're trying to do. And, and yeah, I think their attitude toward risk is an important thing. And that's often, there's often a mindset of, that's different than just good traders or just traders that are successful. Thinking about it in the right way and is a skill, and it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people.
No, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing from, you'll have one guy that you'll be talking to as a trader, and you'll have to basically talk him into making a trade. Like, you got to go, okay, you've been back testing now for 6 months. Just go, pardon my French, go make a fucking trade. If it's like $100 trade, go make a trade. Go put money in and then the other guy who's like, he's done no paper trading with it. He hasn't even like looked through the results. He's got an equity line that looks great, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna dump $100,000 into it and see what happens. And it's just there's just a wide spectrum of people out there. And when it comes to risk, and like with most things, probably the best is somewhere in the middle, right? Somebody who respects risk but understands that if you don't take it, you don't make money. We are rewarded for taking risk. But yeah, it just shows that, again, just such a wildly personal thing that you could not take. And I think that's why, even with AI and with all this stuff, these edges are going to continue to exist in the market because of people's different risk profile. Like I know a guy who he does this kind of strategy that's always interesting, where he's selling put options into earnings calls. He's got some optimized ways to do it. But the idea is that a lot of people are buying put options into earnings calls because they're hedging the risk. So he's essentially an insurance salesman at that point. He is selling the insurance to other people, and he's making a healthy premium off doing it. And he understands that he's right 90% of the time, and every now and then he gets slapped in the face, just like every now and then a house burns down and the company's got to pay out the insurance. And that's the kind of thing that, describing it to some people, they're like, oh, that's great. I'd be fine making a small amount every now and then, just having to pay out a bunch. And then some people would look at that and say, that's just ridiculous. It's such completely flipped kind of asymmetric risk reward that there's no way I would do it. And again, I think that's why it works. Someone wants to buy the put options and earnings. Some other guy wants to sell the put options and earnings. And that's what makes what we do is so cool, is because that's what creates the market.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is good. I think maybe next episode, let's go into, I'd like to go into exactly the strategies I've started with, and then went through like things I tried in the same strategy space, and then what I sort of graduated into. I think it'd be useful. Like basically some things, concrete things you could take away that I think people will be able to start thinking about strategy 2, 3, 4, or different variations of strategies they're trading now.
All right. So are we going to argue for this one? Am I going to need another monster, or do you think we're gonna get along for the next one?
You might. I don't know. You might need a monster. Bring it just in case.
Awesome. Well, and this just shows one of the things that I love the audience for this podcast, because you can tell the sophistication of the questions tells what kind of person is paying attention to it, right? I have yet to get an email of, oh, I heard your guys' podcast, what's the next semiconductor that's going to triple in price? So it's not the questions that we're getting. So it just shows that we found a little niche of audience of people who actually think about this stuff. And, that's kind of the whole point. It's probably the people who are going to be around for some time doing it. So again, congratulations. If you're getting to the point where you're asking questions like this, I think you have to take a second and say, oh, well, I'm already better than 90% of plus of people who enter the market. just because I'm at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, continuation next time. As always, I'm Michael Noss.
And I'm Dave Mabe. Talk to you next week on Line Your Own Pockets.